Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Dante Castillo, and I work for SUMA, coordinating from SUMA, the Empowering Teachers Initiative, which is the program that is organizing this online conversation, this webinar. So welcome to our second online conversation, Harnessing ICT for Large-Scale Teacher Professional Development, a framework to help users to think, design, and implement TPD strategies. In Spanish, we say, aprovechar las tecnologías de la información y la comunicación para el desarrollo profesional docente. This online conversation is organized by the Empowering Teachers Initiative, which is a research program implemented by FITED and SUMA with the support of the International Development Research Center, IDRC in Canada. We are happy to have you join us today for this insightful session to discuss the question on how to harness the use of ICT for large-scale teacher professional development. That is the question we are going to discuss today. And we will be discussing about how we can improve the system to deliver quality TPD in an equitable way at scale. Before we begin with the conversation, with the session, this session will last approximately 1 hour. The webinar has interpretation in English, Spanish, and Spanish English. And of course, feel free to share your questions, your thought in the chat. The program is basically we'll have some welcome remarks from Florencio Ceballos, senior program specialist for IDRC. Then we will introduce this conversation that will be part of the panel. Will be participating some people from Ghana, from Honduras, and Ghana, and Simeo. And Frida Wolfenden will be sharing with us the framework we are presenting today. And finally, we'll be having a conversation with Ernesto Roque Gutierrez, with the panelists, in order to understand and see some examples and experiences of the countries that were part of this conversation. So let me introduce Florencio Ceballos, and he will be giving us some welcome remarks of this seminar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Florencio Ceballos. I'm Senior Program Specialist with the International Development Research Center, IDRC. I work in the Knowledge Innovation Exchange, KICS program, supported by the Global Partnership for Education and IDRC. And I've been lucky to have interacted and built a relationship with FITED and SUMA over the years, and see how that relationship has evolved, has matured, and has moved into the next phase. KICS consider, and IDRC considers FITED and SUMA not just as grantees, but as strategic partners in order to move forward a certain perspective of what we think education should look like, and the challenges that the educational system faces in that regard. As I said, we started quite a few years ago now with an exploration of the TPD at scale model and efforts to build an alliance of like-minded organizations on that regard, and then moved into a full-fledged project within KICS, the TPD at Scale research project that involved Honduras, Ghana, and Uzbekistan. At the beginning, I have to admit, that seemed a bit scattered. It seems that we were working on very different environments, very different systemic realities on those three countries and continents. Nevertheless, we were able to learn a lot and to collect a lot of very valuable evidence out of this. research project. It taught us a lot about how to scale innovations in different educational systems and realities, and also gave us a very good sense of what's the value of comparative research in those fields. So that was quite successful, and also allowed us to move into the next step, which is ETI, a program in which we see that we are taking that collaboration into the next level. FitEd and SUMA have been able not only to do research, but to support others in doing research, sharing their experiences, their models, their lessons learned, but also listen and receive the ones from the organizations they are working with. And I think that has a huge value to strengthen the challenge, but also to strengthen themselves. We know that working around scaling is not an easy thing. We believe that scaling happens sometimes in ways that are unpredictable by nature, that windows of opportunity for scaling an innovation happen or occur at a time when we are not prepared or we're not looking at, or in ways that are not the ones we originally thought. Being prepared for that and having scaling strategies help that purpose. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, actually, I was able to visit Honduras and to meet with the team that originally 5 years ago, led the TPD at Scale initiative in Honduras. And I realized something that maybe was new for me, that one of the big impacts of the TPD at Scale program in Honduras was the ability to influence in a very meaningful way another large public initiative, which is Aula Virtual, the initiative led by the Ministry of Education to support those students that haven't finished their regular school and help them to complete their educational cycle. This initiative took a lot from TPD at Scale, more than you can tell, both in terms of methodologies and technologies and practical lessons learned, but also on the strengthening of the capacities of a certain group of fantastic professionals within the Ministry of Education. And it was for me an eye-opener in the sense that, there are other ways in which scaling occurs, and that's a good thing. So with that reflection, I would like to just say best luck on today's event. I will be very, very eager to hear what you discuss and what you learned today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernesto, and thank you, Florencio, for introducing this session and connect basically with the main topics of this conversation. So just to introduce this conversation, I would like to basically give some context of the project in which we are presenting this framework and having this conversation. The adapting and scaling teacher professional development approaches in Ghana, Honduras, and Uzbekistan basically was an initiative that was born in the Global Partnership for Education and the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, the GPE Kicks initiative in 2020. The GPE Kicks initiative is basically a program that aims to tackle the challenges of existing knowledge gaps and improving access to evidence and using evidence and innovation in the Global South, basically for advancing the achievement of SDG 4. So this has been done by scaling education innovation and strengthening the capacity of partners in developing countries. And that is exactly what Florencio said. how we can, help country partners to improve capacities and to introduce innovations for the achievement of the SDG 4. In this context was born the adapting and scaling teacher professional development approaches in 3 countries, as I said, in Ghana, Honduras, and Uzbekistan. The main idea of that project was to study how different group of teachers and other education actors contribute and experience new and adapted models of ICT-mediated TPD. That was the first idea. The second idea, in the next slide, was the idea to implement this, and we did that with different organizations. In Honduras, we did with the Ministry of Education, in Ghana, with the organizations in charge of the TPD system, and in Ghana, we did exactly the same. These were collaborative research initiatives working with the main actors of the system. But this was done in the context of the TPD at Scale Coalition for the Global South. This coalition has produced different resources, materials, and for advancing basically our thinking and in terms of how we improve TPD system at scale. So we produce a course on TPD, a compendium of models across the world on TPD programs, and now we are running this initiative of the Empowering Teachers initiative, which is a research for development program that seeks to improve teacher practices in the Global South, precisely by improving the key concept that we work on the framework: equity, equality, efficiency. So this project is very aligned with what we are producing in this framework, and that Frida will show in a bit. What we did precisely in the adapting and scaling. Next, Ernesto, please. What we did in this initiative in Honduras, Ghana, and Uzbekistan, basically we will try to address a very complex challenge, and that challenge has to do with strengthening systems of teacher professional development. We say TPD always, as it is a fundamental part to improving classroom teaching and learning. That is the challenge: how to connect both things. What we did was try to explore how the power of ICTs in different ways we can use it, can harness, and can optimize the equity and efficiency in order to increase the quality and equity of the system of TPD at scale. So what we found in this project is basically that ICTs can enhance TPD experiences, but need to be deployed in ways that recognize the diversity of teachers. And this is probably the most important finding: how we can identify and recognize those diversity of teachers, those experiences, including, for example, their condition of work and professional learning needs, and the characteristics in which they are working. So our intervention was basically a collaborative research practice project, and what this initiative tried to achieve was to unpack the mechanism for designing and implementing ICT-mediated TPD at scale. So what we are going to introduce now, next slide, please, Ernesto, it's a framework for ICT-mediated TPD. We are going to discuss basically first with Frida Wolfenden and then with the panel how to harness the use of ICT for large scale TPD system, and having a reflection on how the framework supports education precisely and decision makers to achieve this kind of system shift, system change, in order to provide more quality and equitable programs, TPD programs. So the framework is composed by 6 pillars and has been, created based on the evidence we produce in the three countries. So our next speaker will be Freda Wolfenden. Freda is Professor of Education at the International Development Faculty of Wellbeing, Education and Language Studies in the Open University, and the research lead of the project. So after Freda, we will have a panel of discussion that will be moderated by Ernesto. Ernesto, next, please. And we are going to have 3 colleagues, and probably only 2, because I think our colleagues from Ghana, Lawrence Sarpong, is having issues of connection, as he has said. But also we will have Nidia Montoya, who is technical assistant for international cooperation programs and projects at the Secretary of Education in Honduras. But also we are going to have Gillas Clamor Torneo, who is a specialist for educational research unit in CIMEO. So I want to give the mic to Frida. Please, Frida.
Thank you, Dante. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. As Dante said, I'll be spending a few minutes explaining the framework, the composition of the pillars that make up the framework, and how they can be used. So I'm just going to start with a couple of overarching points about the framework. If you haven't had a chance to look at this prior to this session, please do go and access it at some point from the website. So first of all, just a couple of small points. First of all, I wanted to stress that this framework is kind of neutral in the sense that it's not advocating a particular model or a form of large-scale TPD. It's really designed to aid reflection, evaluation, and enhancement of teacher professional development systems with technologies. And secondly, and I think this is really important to our work, we take a systems approach to teacher professional learning. We argue that all education systems, as Dante's mentioned, need to have structures to diagnose, support, and recognize teachers' professional growth. These structures might be enhanced at a specific moment, for example, when a government is implementing a new curriculum, but they should be a permanent feature of the education system, not sporadic or episodic, dependent on donor funding. So why do we need a framework? We know much about the characteristics of effective teacher professional learning. It needs to be collaborative, it needs to be situated, it needs to be participatory. But we found that just merely adopting these characteristics within a TPD program doesn't necessarily lead to effective, relevant, and empowering professional learning for all teachers. In our work, as Dante has explained, we found we needed to look at the entire teacher education system, which is complex and obviously only one part of the larger dynamic education system. So we're looking at the system, and as you can see here on this diagram, we analyze the system using 3 levels. Many of you will be very familiar with this kind of way of looking at the system. So we took a national or a subnational level, seen on the outermost ring of this circle. This is the broad context within which teachers work, which includes policies, structures, social representations of teachers, and technologies. Then we took a level which could be district, municipal, department, or school level, depending on how a particular system is structured, governed, organized. So the second level, we're looking at norms and practices, rules, expectations, communities of practice, collective cultural beliefs there. And then lastly, and most importantly, we're thinking about individual teachers working in schools or other centres of learning. What are their conditions of work, prior experiences, access to resources, attitudes, beliefs, and so on. So for each of our 6 pillars, as Dante mentioned, we're looking at them in terms of these 3 different levels of the teacher education system within the broader education system. So we have 6 pillars that you can see here: policies, ICTs, technologies, supporting capacities, partnerships, learning design, communication channels. But really, really importantly, we have a seventh pillar. Our seventh pillar is equity. And this is threaded throughout all of the other six pillars. We felt that this pillar is so important that we can't sort of isolate it and treat it even in an interconnected way with all the other six pillars. It needs to be within each of those six pillars. So just to clarify, by equity, we mean fairness and allocation of resources based on need. So this approach to equity considers historical, socio-political factors that affect teachers' opportunities and experiences. So it encourages us to design policies and systems to meet unique needs without giving an unfair advantage to particular groups. So just to emphasize that these pillars, although they're represented here by what look like discrete parts of the circle, they are actually highly interconnected and in dynamic relationships with each other. So let's explore the pillars. Thanks. So first of all, the policy pillar. This covers issues linked to alignment of teacher education policies with the wider education policies. Really importantly, in line with our emphasis on equity, a recognition of the diversity of teacher needs and teacher contexts, where teachers are working, what resources they have, and whether supporting conditions for professional learning of all teachers are in place. While the technology, the ICT pillar, looks at what technological facilities, materials and tools are available to different groups of teachers, how they're being used, and what kinds of digital skills training is available. So you might say that's all very predictable and to be expected. In this pillar, perhaps less obviously, we also look at consideration of whether teachers' professional learning experiences are being recorded, are being noted down, maybe using a digital system, so that their professional growth can be recognised and extended, not repeated in future TPD. So that all the time we are building on what we know teachers have already studied and ways in which their practice has deepened and extended. Moving on, we have the learning design pillar. This really focuses on the attributes of effective TPD I mentioned earlier: collaborative, participatory, situated, and so on. But it also really takes those characteristics with a critical point about whether the program with those characteristics can be adapted to meet the learning needs of different groups of teachers in contextually appropriate ways. For example, can the format be changed, whether it's online, offline, or hybrid? The language, we've discovered in our work many issues around language of TPD, which are impacting on equity. The pacing of the TPD, when teachers have to submit assignments or when they're expected to attend synchronous sessions, and so on. Is there flexibility within the programme to meet this variety of needs? The supporting capacities pillar. This is something which we found often receives less prominence in TPD design evaluation, but our work showed it was really critical to quality TPD systems. So in particular, thinking about, is professional learning made available to those who support teachers, teacher educators, school leaders, district officials, supervisors, tutors, facilitators, and so on? And are opportunities to move into these roles made available to all teachers? Sometimes we see recruitment to these roles reinforcing gendered role division. This pillar also prompts a consideration of what's needed to ensure the socio-emotional well-being of all teachers so that they can participate with commitment and enthusiasm in TPD. Something that we found is not often given that much attention in the design of TPD, but which really emerged as an issue for teachers when we were listening to their voices. Our final two pillars are communication channels and partnerships. So for communication channels, of course, it's important that teachers and those who support their professional learning are made aware of TPD opportunities using as many different modes of communication as possible, platforms such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, and so on. But, and we feel this aspect is often not very well considered, it's also important to have mechanisms for teachers and those that are working with them to offer feedback on their TPD experiences to improve the TPD. Too often the communication is unidirectional. Finally, the partnerships pillar continues the positioning of teachers at the centre of teacher professional development, involving teachers in designing, implementing, evaluating, and improving TPD, as well as working with other organisations and institutions, particularly those involved in pre-service teacher education, so that we can ensure that teachers' professional learning is career-long and coherent. Equally importantly, our work within this pillar identified a need in several of the countries we are working in, a need for greater coordination and dialogue at different levels between government agencies responsible for teacher management and those agencies responsible for TPD. Sometimes we see that there's a lack of coherence across those agencies, so that maximum use of resources isn't happening. So in the framework, we use the questions, and there's some exemplar questions here, and there's the questions are pulled together in the document under the QR code earlier. The questions work to mobilize thinking, to enable us to reflect on, to evaluate current TPD provision, value what works. I think that's really important, identifying what are the strengths of the system, and then identifying target areas for improvement, in particular where ICTs might have maximum impact in return for investment. These questions help different actors to take a new perspective, perhaps on their work within the context of the whole teacher education system, integrating their own local realities into the broader ecosystem of teacher education. This helps prepare the TPD system for future development and changes or disturbances in the external environment. So I'd now like to hand over to our colleagues who we worked with in the research from which this framework is drawn, for them to kind of tell us a little bit about how they've been using the framework, what it enabled them to perhaps see that hadn't always been visible before, and also perhaps how the framework is being adapted. Just my final point is that this is very much a living tool. It is a tool, not a worksheet. It's a tool which we see being adapted for different contexts and evolving over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Frida. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us today. In this second part of the webinar, as Frida mentioned, we'll have the opportunity to learn more about the framework, especially how it has been used now in Honduras and in Southeast Asia. We apologize again, our colleague from Ghana couldn't make it, but if you want to learn more about Ghana's experience, you can read the document so you can see the QR from before. So in terms of the format, I think we will first listen to both speakers, after which we will open the floor for questions. So feel free to note down your thoughts as we go along, and we'll have an opportunity to maybe address some of the questions in the chat. So first, I'd like to invite Nidia Montoya Arias from the Secretariat of Education in Honduras, who will talk about how learnings from this project, and specifically connected to the conceptualization of the framework, have been used or have informed, in a way, the development of a new education initiative taking place now in Honduras. Over to you, Nidia. Just as a reminder, we have interpreting services, so please make sure that you're choosing the right channel.
Muchas gracias, Ernesto. Buenos días.
Thank you,
Buenas tardes y buenas
Ernesto.
noches a
Good
todos los
morning, good
colegas que
evening,
nos
good
escuchan y que
afternoon
nos escuchan en
to all
este
those
día.
who are listening
Gracias por
to
la
us.
invitación para
Thank you so much
compartir
for
esta
the
experiencia
invitation to
para la
share my
Secretaría de Educación de
experience
Honduras y
that
para
for
el
the
Sistema
Secretariat of
Educativo
Education of
de
Honduras and for
Honduras
the
ha sido
educational
muy
system
relevante
in
y
our country
significativa y que
has
hasta el
been
día de hoy nos
relevant and
permite
meaningful,
sobre
and
todo a
at
través
up to
de
now it
contar
has
con esta
allowed us
herramienta
to
del mapa
have this
energético,
tool of this
seguir
framework, and
indagando,
we will
seguir
continue
experimentando
to
y
experiencing
consolidando
and finding
algunos de
out
los
and
procesos
consolidating
que como
some of the
Secretaría de Educación nos
processes that
corresponden,
as
sobre todo
Education
en lo que se
Secretariat
refiere
belong
al
to us
desarrollo
as
docente.
related to the
Contarles que en
TPD.
el 2019 que
In
recibimos la
2019,
invitación de
when
participar
we
en el
received the
proyecto, lo
invitation to
hicimos con mucho
participate in the
agrado,
project,
no
we did
solo
it
por
very happily,
el prestigio
not
de
only
las
because of the
organizaciones que
prestige
nos
of the
convocaron a
organizations
participar,
involved,
sino porque en ese
but
momento
also
nos
because in that
encontrábamos
moment
trabajando
we were
en el
working
desarrollo de un
on the
modelo de
development
formación
of
permanente de
a
docentes
model of
con la
permanent
intención de
training for
concretar
teachers with
un
the idea
documento
to
marco o lineamientos
create a
marco del
framework, a
Sistema Nacional de Formación Docente,
document
SINAFOR.
with the
Entonces, la invitación nos viene de
guidelines
manera muy
of the
oportuna
system
y nos
in
crea las
Honduras, the
expectativas
Sinavod,
de
and
conocer
it
experiencias
aligned to our
internacionales, el desarrollo
expectations, and we
internacional
had the
y
possibility
quizás
to
obtener la
understand
asesoría que
international
necesitamos
experiences and
para
obtaining the
concretar
support that we
nuestro
needed
propio
to
modelo de formación
create our
permanente de
own
docentes.
model of this permanent training model
Acordamos
for
en
teachers.
principio que íbamos a
We
utilizar un curso
agreed
que ya
that
teníamos,
we're going to use a
partiendo desde la
course that we
parte
already
operativa,
had,
para
starting from
experimentar
the
todos
operational
estos
part to
elementos de manera
experience all
íntegra,
these
los elementos
elements in an
de la
integral
formación
way,
continua
the
de docentes.
elements of this
Había ya
continuous
mucha
training
experiencia
for teachers.
institucional
We had a
en
lot
la
of
impartición de
an
cursos
institutional experience
presenciales. Sin
with
embargo, aquí le
in-person courses,
agregábamos algo
but
que también
here
veníamos
we were adding
experimentando,
something that we were
que es el apoyo
experiencing,
con las
and that
tecnologías y
is the
cómo
support with the
este
TICs,
apoyo
with the
podía
ICTs, and
ayudarnos a
how this
ofrecer
support would
un
help
proceso de
us to
formación
offer
permanente más
a
equitativo
training
y de
process
mayor
that would
calidad.
be more
Y
equivalent and
emprendimos
with more
la tarea
equity
de
and with more
hacer las
quality.
adaptaciones necesarias.
And we
Sin
started with the
embargo,
necessary
si recuerdan,
adaptations
esto
for this.
comenzó en
But if you
2020 y en
remember,
marzo
this
de
started in
2020
2020, and
Honduras
in
cierra
March
todas sus escuelas,
2020,
cierra los centros de
Honduras
formación
closed its
docente
schools, the
debido a la
training
pandemia del
centers for
COVID-19. Y
teachers
esto
due to
también
the
implicó
COVID-19
que ya el apoyo de
pandemic.
las tecnologías
And
no iba a
it
ser
showed us that the support
algo
of the
parcial, sino que tenía
ICTs
que
was
ser
not
ya
going to
de
be
manera
something
total. ¿Y
partial,
de qué
but
manera
total.
podíamos
We
implementar
needed
un
to see
curso,
how we
el
could
que se había seleccionado
implement a
ya y ya
course
teníamos algún
that
trabajo
had
avanzado,
been
era
already
el de geometría
selected,
para
and that
docentes de
was the
tercer ciclo, imagínense,
geometry for the
matemáticas
third
ofrecido
cycle
de
teachers.
manera virtual.
Imagine
Y
mathematics offered
además
in a
adaptar el
virtual
uso de
like
las
room or
tecnologías en un
scale, and
curso
adapting the
100%
use of
virtual.
ICTs in a
Cuando
100%
ya
virtual
teníamos esas
course.
decisiones
So
y
when we
enfrentábamos esa
had
realidad,
made
pues
these
comenzamos a
decisions and we
trabajar
were
procesos
facing
ya
this
que eran
reality, we
conocidos
started
y
to work
experimentados
with
en la
some
institución, no
processes
habían
that
logrado
although
consolidar. Hablamos
they
de
were
diseño
known
instruccional
before
para cursos virtuales,
in
la
the
producción de los recursos
they had not
digitales
implemented
también,
them.
que
They
era
are
una
talking
de las
about
realidades que
instructional
en ese
resources, the
momento
implementation
teníamos y
of
enfrentábamos,
digital resources. That was
la
one of our
evaluación por
weaknesses,
medios
the evaluation or
virtuales
assessment
y
through
la
digital
formación de tutores sobre todo,
platforms,
que es un
and the
perfil
training
que no
of tutors
existe
that
todavía
does not
de manera
exist, or it's a
oficial
profile
dentro
that
de la
does not
Secretaría de
officially
Educación,
exist
pero que ya
in the
desde ese momento
Secretariat
era
of
necesario.
Education, but in
Un
that moment
desafío
it was
adicional, y lo
necessary
han
to create
mencionado
that.
también,
An
es en
additional
cuanto al apoyo
challenge, it
que
was
se
about the
brinda a los
support
docentes en
provided
estos
to
procesos de
teachers
desarrollo
in
profesional,
these
es que contábamos
TPD
con
processes.
escasos
And also
especialistas
we had just a few
de matemáticas
specialists
que
on
pudiesen o que
mathematics that
tuviesen
could or
la
that had the
de ser tutores
possibility of
en
being
un curso
tutors
de esta
in this
naturaleza.
type of course.
Además de ello, teníamos
Besides that, we also
la
had
parte de la gestión.
this part about
Teníamos
management.
todos los aspectos
We
pedagógicos,
had all the
tecnológicos,
pedagogical
el uso de
aspects,
plataformas,
technological
cómo poder
aspects,
llegar de manera
the use of
equitativa a
platforms,
docentes
how
que
to
quizá
reach in
tenían
an
una conectividad
equitative way
limitada.
to
Esto se
professors that had
resolvió
a limited
mediante la
connectivity that was
creación
solved
de
through the creation
materiales y
of
recursos educativos
materials
digitales
or
offline
digital
que los docentes en algún
educational
momento,
resources
porque
that
sí
teachers
se
at some
prestó la
point,
experiencia para
because
indagar
this
sobre
experience
cuáles
allowed them to find out about the possibilities of teachers of having access to devices and connectivity, and they determined that at some point of the month of the course, teachers have access at least once a week to connectivity and devices, so they could download the course and develop the activities from their work place. In that moment, the schools were closed, but from their homes, and in the possibility to upload the activities they had performed offline. Something relevant to the experience, and that is the differentiated experience, that it is important that the TPD systems take into account, and that is the fact that the course addressed for mathematics teachers in the third cycle of basic education, that not all teachers that are specialists in mathematics, they might be specialists in different subjects such as science, and this way we had to foresee the support the specialists had to receive and the non-specialists in mathematics. So, and we did it because in person the trainer improvises or may solve a situation, but when you are working online, this has to be foreseen or it has to be done in advance. From all these elements that come from an operational action and that are pillars in this analytical framework, we see that the learnings from experience are the need of diagnosis, the use of the results of the teacher's assessment, and to determine an offer that is consistent and is coherent with the needs of teachers, not only from a perspective point of view, but teachers feel that this training helps them to solve these problems in their professional practice. We also see, we have to recognize the leadership that has been stated from that has to be like awarded to the national authorities or the local authorities that are close to teachers, that can organize and determine and help and identify the training needs of teachers. And at the moment of implementation, this has to be more consistent. They made us reflect on the incentives teachers receive when developing new skills through these trainings, or the need to provide facilities so they participate. If these courses are mandatory, how can we support teachers so they can solve and face the activities of the different courses without being an obstacle to their work with the students? In the case of Honduras, in this experience, what we achieved was to provide 1 day off or 1 day of activities, and through this platform, due to the reports generated, that day the teacher was off. It was a Friday. Every week, teachers would be connected, and we could also determine the time they would spend there, and those 5 hours. The course was designed, those 4 hours were the necessary ones so the teachers could develop all their activities. This was proven, and we could have a higher retention because many teachers would opt out from the course because they didn't have enough time to attend these needs or these activities. And from the organization and the communication channels, we had these protocols for the management of the training. If there might be some new people, and how can they continue with the processes although they have new people working on that. And this gives us the protocols for the management of the training and protocols for the performance of tutors. As they were receiving this training, they didn't have this previous training. In Honduras, we don't have training centers for tutors, but we only have access through some courses, very specific courses for those who will participate in something particular, or through the training in other countries, or also online. Something that is very important, very important for the sustainability, is the analysis of the cost of training. In our greatest experience was the in-person training and mixed or hybrid training. And when we did that, when we did this virtually, this allowed us, through a tool that we applied, having the costs and comparing them from what we did in person in a mixed or virtual way, and the operational plan. Once this first year finished, it aimed to have the greatest part of the training would be virtually, because that would be more efficient when using the resources. And that is in terms of TPD at scale that wanted to be more equitative and with more quality. And in terms of this experience and how this translates to other fields of the educational system, in terms of training offered for the young and for the adults, adult population, this, when people didn't finish their high school studies, we already had the project of creating this secondary education that was like system that was virtual, but the first experience was like moving all the things that we had in person to a platform. There wasn't a special approach with the virtual things, with the experiences that we had had, and we didn't have the experience of the production of digital educational resources, but only they uploaded readings in PDF format. They didn't consider the attention by tutors, but they thought this could be a self-study course. But when the experience showed us that, and we started to take all this process that we were following with this creation of a TPD at scale model to apply the design of learning or learning design through the instructional learnings for the virtual education, production of digital educational resources that would consider not only the technical aspects or aesthetic aspects or content aspects, but also the context and the possibilities of students to see without any delay a video, to perform any interactive activity, which should be the features of these digital educational resources, the tutorings, the attention. We still have this challenge that we don't have many specialists in some knowledge areas that have this availability to work with this in a virtual mode. One of the experiences of the TPD at scale, there we had a group of specialists, a small group, but this group of tutors that would dynamize and that would have a special contact with the participants, and that would move these scientific content questions to specialists that were willing to respond through new examples, through new materials, to respond to these questions from the different participants, and we continue to attend this same work scheme. Out of these, the evaluation through these virtual means and the recovery of learnings that we do through some specialized attention groups that are called Grupos Lázaro, in which the participants that were lagged or that were left behind, we would recover them and we would treat them in a group that was more specialized according to the needs they had. And this way, we see how the TPD at Scale project gave us these experiences and lessons learned that are replicable in the secondary school, and in the near future they will be applicable for new educational offers. And this was because we strengthening the institutional capacities that we already had, but somehow they had not been consolidated. Thank you so much for the opportunity of allowing me to share my experience. Thank you very much.
Nidia. Well, thank you, Nidia. And I think I'm also aware of times. I had a few comments, but great to see just overall so many examples of how that experience with the project and how you linked these to the pillars and how that has informed this new initiative that you're now developing. So it's great to see how what you've taken and what you've learned from that project is now informing this new program. So thank you for that. I'm going to invite now Hiyas Clamor Torneo from Simeo in Southeast Asia. Just for us, perhaps, just to have an opportunity to learn more about how they have adopted the framework, and how they've made a few adaptations in the use of the framework as a learning tool.
Thank you, Ernesto. Basically, I am Hiyas Clamor Torneo. I'm part of the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, Regional Center for Educational Innovation and Technology. So we're a regional intergovernmental organization established in 1965 among governments of Southeast Asian countries to promote regional cooperation in education, science, and culture in the region. So the focus of the ETI project in Southeast Asia with CMU is policy and practice influencing. So together with 9 countries, we hope to develop policy instruments that will be shared with the ministers of education. So we're combining research and capacity development. We've involved officials from the ministries of education, from the national, subnational, and school levels who are knowledgeable about their TPD systems. So the idea is they go through the TPD at Scale open course, which was mentioned a while ago, and we will have live sessions with them, and we will guide them in developing country reports on their TPD systems. And then we'll examine their perspectives in those reports and their inputs during the live sessions to come up with critical analysis of their TPD systems and propose actionable policy recommendations. So we needed a framework to help us guide the country teams in their assessments of their TPD systems, and fortunately, FitEd shared with us the framework on strengthening TPD systems using ICT. So what we did was we adapted the framework with the understanding of the context of the Southeast Asian region. And one of the major things we considered was recognizing the level of the school as another education governance level. We acknowledge that the teacher's participation in TPD and mechanisms in the school are heavily influenced by the school head or the school principal. If the school head is not supportive of TPD or does not foster an environment for collaboration among the teachers, then they are left on their own devices for their professional development. In addition, we compared and contrasted the framework with the content of the TPD at Scale open course, because these are the 2 major content bodies that we rely on and hope to share with the country representatives. And so we added a few questions in the pillars where they make sense. For example, in policy, we added a couple of questions on, is TPD available to all teachers, regardless of position, status, and age? How can learning from innovations in TPD be captured and influence policies, processes, and mechanisms? For learning design, we also added a couple of questions on the alignment of TPD with the profile of learners under the teacher's care, and the alignment with the basic education curriculum. So these were the plans we originally had in mind. However, we realized that we had to adjust our plans when we started engaging the country teams, and we had to make a few practical adaptations in the framework, among which include selecting fewer questions from the pillars. Since we only had 2-hour sessions with several country teams, we had to choose questions based on their alignment with the TPD at Scale open course modules that we'll discuss for that particular day. And we also considered the logical flow of the questions. In addition, since we cannot discuss all the questions in the framework, we plan to organize or conduct focus group discussions with them to better understand their context and ensure that the analysis and policy recommendations are really reflective of their experiences. Lastly, we noticed a few things in using the framework. So most country representatives shared positive aspects of their TPD systems and seemed to have a hard time articulating challenges. This was especially at the start of the learning cycle. However, as we formed rapport with the country teams, they began to open up about their reflections on the framework questions and also share challenges in terms of equity, quality, and efficiency. Another thing that I noticed is that we also had to be conscious of the perspective that we had in asking the questions. Oftentimes, the country representatives are more comfortable sharing their experiences with specific programs on TPD. However, we want them to have a broader perspective and look at their experiences through the lens of systems. So I only notice this now as I am analyzing their inputs during the live sessions. And so I guess for the next batch of countries, we really have to be conscious in asking them about the systems that govern and sustain their TPD programs. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Hiyas. It's really interesting to learn about and the unique perspective that you have as a regional organization, but to learn from the adaptations that you were sharing. And I think hopefully it communicates to people how the framework is not a finished product, but it's more of an evolving instrument that you can make work for your context. So it's great to see how some of these adaptations have been much more in a way governed by the context. Some might be a bit more practical in the delivery, but all interesting to learn about. So thank you for that. I'm aware of time. I know we had a bit of a delay at the beginning, but hopefully we might have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So again, if you have a question, you can type it in the chat, and we'll aim to maybe answer a couple of them. If it's a question that is open for the panel or if it's specific to one of the speakers, if you can let us know, that'll be great. I can't monitor the chat from my end unless I stop sharing. So Frida and Dante, if you've seen any questions in the chat, could you let me know?
No, Ernesto, there is no questions on the chat.
So far, okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, please feel free to, if it's just a comment that you want to make or a general question.
No, maybe if we don't have maybe Frida, if you want to ask, or any colleagues joining the question, the session.
I think one thing that I can add in the meantime, also considering that, as I said, we couldn't have our colleague from Ghana, but one thing that I noticed as you were providing so many examples, Nidia, is the interdependency. So many of the things that you mentioned, that's something that they picked up in Ghana. In Ghana, they had their own version of their framework, and we had the different levels, national, district, teacher level. And they organized this based on priority. So they had areas that needed improvement, some strengths of the systems that they identified, and some perhaps issues that might consider as threat. But what was quite interesting is how many of these issues are really connected. So in your case, Nidia, you were talking, for example, about many of the lessons learned from learning design in terms of the delivery of the course and the pace of the course, but how that is actually also connected to the ICT pillar, which is a separate pillar because, again, you were trying to do this also because of the pandemic. You were moving online and you had to also think of forms of support that would work digitally based on the experience so far in Honduras had been largely face-to-face. But I quite like the examples in isolation, but how all of these examples illustrate how interconnected many of these issues are across the pillars, across different levels, national, district, teacher. So that was quite nice to see. Anyone else that would like to join in? Or if not, I can, perhaps I can hand it over to Dante, who is going to provide some closing remarks of our event today. And I just want to thank again Iyas and Nidia for insightful commentary.
Thank you, Ernesto, for the moderation of the discussion. Thank you, Nidia, and thank you, Iyas. Also, thank you, Frida, for presenting us the framework. Just as a final remarks, I would like to emphasize maybe three key ideas just for us to take with us. The first one, I would say, taking some words of Nidia and Iyas, this idea of the complexity of the system, multiple layers and multiple components that needs to be considered, to have, as Iyas said, a broader perspective, and I think that kind of broader, wider perspective, I think is key in order to think, the TPD as a whole system. So that is connected precisely with the idea of the framework as a learning tool. It is how this analytical framework, can help decision makers, practitioners, designers, as Nidia was mentioning, to think, and having this wider perspective. Basically, I would say to put focus on I like how Frida put it in this way, how to think in the 7th pillar, in the equity. I think this is probably the most important, principle we have been trying to address in terms of the activities and the collaborations we are having with research teams, stakeholders, ministers of education, is how we can put the focus on equity, which is a critical component that the systems need to offer those opportunities for different and diverse professional needs. So, and the final point I would like to highlight and to emphasize is to say probably this need a lot of adaptation, as Nidia and Iyas was saying, adaptations in terms of the learning design, how their framework help us to think in what type of adaptations, what type of specific consideration we have to do in order to address those specific professional needs of teachers. So in terms of the resources to provide for them and for the system to be and to offer experiences, meaningful experiences, I would say, of teacher professional learning. So having said that, I want to express again our thanks, many thanks for joining us in these conversations. In this conversation particularly, this is the second one, and hope you have a very good rest of the day. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.